Ladies and metalfish, this is your hard-boiled and handsome duelist, Daddy Janjo. Well, here we are. I am finally tackling another one of these hefty OCG videos because you all wanted it, and hey, I'm a Janjo of the people. Like my last two OCG history videos, I will primarily be using the TCG names for cards to make it easier to understand for my main demographic. So grab some popcorn or Cheez-Its and your favorite beverage because this is gonna be a long video.
いよいよ始まる話題沸騰の新感覚アニメーション。許せぬ悪を壮絶なゲームバトルでぶちのめす。毎回度肝を抜くような噂のニューゲームが続々登場。友情の熱い戦いを見せるぜ。究極のゲームアクションヒーロー新番組遊戯王。激烈バトル闇のゲーム。さあゲームの時間だ。
When we last left off with Series 2 OCG, we saw a variety of scary decks from Stein OTK, Cannon Burn, Deck Destruction, Exodia variants, Guilford OTK at local levels, Last Turn, Exchange of the Spirit OTK, Yadalock, and Treasure Big Bang. Thankfully, due to a demanding limited list, many strategies of 2000, 2001, and early 2002 were hit, and moving into Series 3 in the spring of 2002, we mainly saw only two decks make it through the narrow pass. Tomahan, which was the tomato hand-controlled deck, and Yadalock, which is more or less the good stuff deck. A new series did mean a new look, as the cards would make a big change from the last series. And as a quick element to note, here's the current list that goes through all of 2002. Pause if you'd like a more thorough look at it. Series 3 started with a new card design named Global Standard Format and is a layout still used to this day. Smaller art box, the flavor effect text box has been expanded with text itself becoming smaller to allow more characters and was unified with the stat box as well. It certainly makes a distinct change from Yu-Gi-Oh! Of old to Yu-Gi-Oh! Of 2002. This was a positive change, as it allowed for more complex card design thanks to more effect real estate. For that matter, it allowed for past cards the space for effect explanation and less room for misinterpretation. You would not be able to fit Chaos Emperor Dragon in a playable Series 2 style. The floodgates were open before anyone realized it.
戦いの舞台は世界へ広がる。 秘められし力を解放せよ。新たなるデュエル、新たなる伝説。遊戯王オフィシャルカードゲームデュエルモンスターズ新たなる支配者好評発売中。
The first Series 3 set would be the New Ruler on May 16th, 2002, which is the sister set to the last set of Series 2, Pharaonic Guardian. Series 3 would kick off with some solid new cards: Lava Golem, Spirit Reaper, Gravekeepers, Metamorphosis, and Raigeki Break, just to name a few. You also saw the rise of more complex cards right away: Buster Rancher, Reversal Quiz, Question, etc. Reaper was a great card for its battle protection that is more searchable than a Giant Soldier of Stone and checks opponent's deck building for non-battle removal. Not only that, but like Don Zaluk, who was released earlier this year, Reaper can rip a random card out of the opponent's hand if it deals direct damage. At the end of the day, it was a great protection tool which worked well with the recently adopted zombie engine and was a solid card in the current top decks, Tomahan and Yadalock. New Ruler did have a check to Reaper, however, and that's Raigeki Break. This is a simple one-card removal at its finest. It's a trap that can destroy any one card by discarding one card, which includes destroying Spirit Reaper. Break is a much more versatile, all-purpose removal that sets it apart from previous popular removal like Tribute to the Doomed and Raigeki. Sure, you had to discard a card, but hey, that's what Sinister Serpent is for, of whom was at 3 copies by this point. And of course, you'd be playing Serpent because at 3, it also pairs well with Barrage of Nightmare as possible discard fodder that will salvage itself the following turn. By the way, you can use Raigeki Break on your Mirage during your opponent's standby phase, so it all synergizes together. But those are baby's toys when it comes to another card in New Ruler, and that would be Reasoning. If you're unaware what this complex looking card does, your opponent calls a monster level and you send the top card from your deck to the grave until you hit a monster. If your opponent called it correctly, normally it's sent to the grave, but if they called it wrong, then you can special summon that monster. It's random by nature, yet it can be swayed by both deck building and player knowledge. The card is designed for combo decks, and what better deck to make use of it than Stein OTK? We haven't seen that in much relevance since early Series 2. Cyberstein into Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon equipped with Megamorph brings back Eternal Dual Souls nightmares. It didn't last too long when the deck was first formed, however, thanks to reasoning, it's now a deck to contend with. A new ruler indeed, as the set also brought us the first fleshed out archetype, Gravekeepers. An archetype is a reoccurring idea, and that idea follows with the field spell Necro Valley, whose core effect is to shut off the graveyard of cards trying to pull from it like Monster Reborn. It even has a secondary effect where it boosts the stats of all Gravekeeper monsters by 500 points, and also allows you to use other related support cards like Royal Tribute and Rite of Spirit. Sure, there were Toon cards beforehand, and even still, those are more of a collection of cards than a cohesive deck. Synergy was the key here, and it would be the first for a long path for Yu-Gi-Oh! To follow as it became more prevalent year after year. Yes, you can blame the new ruler for more complex card effects and designer decks over fan decks way before Lightsworn and Gladiator Beasts. Honestly, for a first go at a designer deck, GKs aren't half bad. Spy has a great defense stat even before the Necro Valley buff that you can pull another Spy straight from the deck. Guard has a bouncing effect, and Watcher can be seen in side decks against FTK decks. But ultimately, with Spy being the best of the freshman lineup, Spirit Reaper simply was the more popular pick, and as such meant that GKs didn't have a strong presence early on. At the end of the day, the three top decks would be Tomahan, Yadalok, and Stein OTK, with some people trying out a Gravekeeper deck. Only 5 days later would be the V-Jump July 2002 promotional card, Blade Knight. This warrior can gain attack if you only have one or less cards in hand, plus if it's your only monster on field, flipped monsters' effects are negated when destroyed by Knight. Compared to beaters at the time, this was a rather unique monster. Potentially you have a low-level monster that can punch over Gemini Elf, trade with Vampire Lord, and having a presence a bit more reliable than, say, Goblin Attack Force. Keep in mind, during this time, the two top decks both used handicap strategies, aka hand control, so it wasn't far beyond reach that you would be in a situation where Blade Knight gained you advantage while you're at a disadvantage. Monster count in decks weren't even high anyways to further make use of Mirage of Nightmare and needing to set cards. You could also look at Slate Warrior for another monster with high attack potential. However, it did have the downside of being limited during this period. Attack aside, its flip monster hate effect, while not countering cards like Sandgan or Pyramid Turtle, does neutralize flip monsters like Magician of Faith, even if you saw less of them at this current time. Less so now because of Blade Knight. Tomahan didn't adopt the card as much as Yadalok since recruiter monsters were more important for the deck to operate.
かつてない生命の誕生、かつてない戦いの興奮、最前線を超えていけ。遊戯王オフィシャルカードゲームデュエルモンスターズユニオンの降臨好評発売中。そしてデュエリストレガシーボリューム2。
The next core set was Advent of Union on July 18, 2002, and introduces Union monsters into the game along with the XYZ series. Unions were rather dead on arrival, aside from fans wanting to create their XYZ character deck. A few interesting cards came from this set: Nico Mane King, Kaiser Coliseum, Wave Motion Cannon. Of the new cards, Spell Canceller was the one that made an impact. This is the spell version of Janjo, with the major flaw of having 1800 attack, which, as you now know, was incredibly weak given the popular 1900 attack card pool. In theory, yes, Spell Canceller would make an impact, but due to its comparison low attack, it never became a popular card. Another card that would be a great release would be Rivalry of Warlords. This continuous trap makes it so that each player can only control one type of monster on each of their fields. It's good depending on the deck, seeing how many of the top decks use a variety of types. Because of this, you didn't see this card as often as you'd think either, since no player wanted to shoot themselves in the foot, so to speak. Advent of Union on the spice level would be considered salt. Most of the new cards were fine, just nothing that would change the meta. And hey, if you're enjoying this video and enjoy historic Yu-Gi-Oh content, then definitely consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel if you haven't, or even sharing this video around or joining my Patreon to support me further. Your help goes a long way. While none of the sets thus far have heavily affected the meta itself is prone to influence as we've seen up till now. Will this new core set change anything?
全ては石の力に導かれ、闇の技術が今世界を覆い尽くす。遊戯王オフィシャルカードゲームデュエルモンスターズ黒魔道の覇者9月19日発売。コナミ。
On September 19, 2002 would be Champion of Black Magic, which introduced the spell counter mechanic. From that mechanic, Breaker the Magical Warrior is head of the class. When this spellcaster's normal summon, it adds one spell counter on it where you can remove it to destroy a back row card, or keep the counter on to have a 300 attack gain. With the boost, you now have a 1900 attacker on field that can crash with a Gemini Elf or act as a walking mystical space typhoon. While yes, it does get weaker should you use its destruction effect, its versatility cannot be denied, much like Blade Knight where its attack wasn't its only use. Breaker is like a free MST because you don't lose a card in the process. Quite the contrary as you maintain board presence, which is more than I can say for Exiled Force. It's another card that can break through Imperial Order and clearly a strong staple moving forward. In Champion of Black Magic, we also got more 1900 attackers, Luster Dragon and Skilled Dark Magician. These two monsters not only have the common baseline attack, they have high defense to boot. Given the high amount of beaters, one could see this as Konami attempting to raise the bar before heading into 2000 attack waters. Beforehand, Gemini Elf and Vorse Raider had no higher than 1200 defense, but now you had the same beaters just with a height of 1700 defense, which protects you from a neutral Blade Knight or Breaker. Another card most certain of notoriety is Magical Scientist. Pay 1000 life points to special summon a level 6 or lower fusion monster and it cannot attack directly and is returned to the fusion deck during the end phase. Life point cost and non-direct attack functionality aside, this is a great way to take care of any pesky monsters. During this September period, the strongest fusion monster you could summon off Scientist was Crimson Sunbird. Essentially what you're looking at is a special summonable goblin attack force. But attack wasn't always the name of the game as we have seen the game going in. There is a decent selection of effect fusion monsters to pick from too. Thousand Eyes Restrict, Dark Balter the Terrible, Fiend Skull Dragon, and Ryu Senshi. Now with one monster you can deal with problematic monsters or have negation tools. As long as you have life points, you can use Scientist's effect, multiple times a turn even. Think of it this way, Magical Scientist, who is easily searchable, has 2300 attack, can negate normal back row cards, flip effects, recruiters, and searchers, and can suck up a monster on the field just for shits and gigs, a Swiss Army card if there ever were one. Let's also discuss Tribe Infecting Virus. Discard one card to destroy a whole type on the field. Like Scientist, this effect can potentially be used multiple times a turn. Just keep in mind that its effect can affect your side of the field too, and that it has to be face-up monsters. This is where monsters like Exiled Force and DD Warrior have an edge. Also, Vampire Lord was running around at the time, which made Tribe's effect slightly less potent. Otherwise, you have a monster that can theoretically take care of most problems with not a bad discard cost thanks to many Yada Lock decks running 3 Sinister Serpents. Say goodbye to your opponent's Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. Between the tug of war of Tomahan and Yada Lock, Champion of Black Magic did make some noticeable waves. Duelists having easy access to summon Dark Balter meant recruiters have a tough time getting their full advantage, which hurt Tomahan. On the other hand, during your opponent's turn, you were easy picking since Scientist, Tribe, and Breaker do nothing while you're not in control and leave you open for hand control. Moving forward, Tomahan would have to adapt more so than Yada Lock or Stein OTK. On October 5th, 2002, Japan got the valuable Book 5 that was bundled with 2 new cards, the first of which was Fiend's Sanctuary that summons a Metal Fiend token on your field. This token cannot attack, but any damage taken from the token will be given to the other player. The token also has a 1000 life point standby phase upkeep. With 0 attack and 0 defense, this token may not be of any use. However, it does not have any tribute restrictions, unlike Scapegoat. Sure, tribute summoning wasn't super popular at this point, and yet Fiend's Sanctuary only has growing utility in early OCG Yu-Gi-Oh! The second card from this 5th book of value is Metal Reflect Slime. While not the first trap monster in the game that would go to embodiment of Apophis in August 2001, this slime has a whopping 3k defense. Not many monsters at this time could attack over it, let alone introducing a defender that can be summoned much easier than Millennium Shield. It counters many popular cards and surprises your opponent too. Being attacked directly with Don Zalug and activating Slime can mean a waste of a battle phase potentially. Unfortunately, you do have to worry about its weakness to back removal like MST if your opponent is willing to use it on Slime and not throw in Mirage of Nightmare or the recently released Breaker. At least its Aqua type gave it some trade with Tribe. In November's Gospel of Truth, the OCG received Yugioh Friendship and Unity, which, if used together, could force a handshake on your opponent. Maybe more. Not exactly what I would call making friends by forcing a handshake, so maybe you could narrow it down to Heart of the Cards or something. Give it another 9 years and you can even play Handshake Dark World. Wow, what a strange card Yugioh Friendship is.
精霊の光が大いなる6つの力を呼び覚ます。この世界は激震に包まれる。遊戯王オフィシャルカードゲームデュエルモンスターズガーディアンの力11月21日発売。そしてデュエリストレガシーボリューム3 Konami。
Later that month, on the 21st, was Power of the Guardian, with more cards to assist the meta. For one, Despair of the Dark was a great counter to Tomahan. Skill Drain is a card that will only gain power as the advancement of effects increase. Exodia Necros is, well, a card. What's better than Necros, however, is Ojama Trio. Summon 3 Ojama tokens to your opponent's field, and when destroyed, they deal 300 points of damage. These cannot be tributed, fill up the field, and can burn up to 900 life points. So the only way for your opponent to actively remove them was something like Dark Hole or Cannon Soldier, which still has its downsides like still taking burn damage or clearing out their own monsters too. In their defense, they do have 3 monsters on the field to protect themselves from direct attacking, so Ojama Trio is not a broken card in theory. It's when you put 2 cards together is when the magic happens. Well, perhaps that's not the best term in this case. Remember Spell Canceller? Since the environment is flooded with power spells galore, one could run the Chancellor Canceller and back it up with trap cards instead, like Gravity Bind to protect your weaker monsters. Unfortunately for this strategy, both Breaker and Tribe can take care of Canceller too, so that's where Ojama Trio comes in. Activate this trap when your opponent has 2 monsters on the field and suddenly they can't summon their monsters out. Rivalry of Warlords comes into play too if you can summon the tokens on an empty board. Now your opponent has no choice but to play only beast type monsters. If they get to where they have 2 tokens on field, then you just activate another to have a full lock. Then you find your win condition and burn cards like Just Desserts, Nightmare Wheel, or Lava Golem, which finishes this new deck called Jamakan or Ojama Canceller. It took what Aroma Chain attempted to do in 2001 and achieved much better results. Really, the main thing to look out for would be Jinzo or opposing traps like World Decree and Raigeki Break. But the one card from Power of the Guardian that created a dark crisis in Yu-Gi-Oh! Has to be Butterfly Dagger Elma. This equipped spell adds 300 attack points, and when the equipped spell is sent to the grave, it's returned to the owner's hand instead. As you may already see, its power lies in its self-salvaging effect since its attack buff is minuscule. Keep in mind that if it's destroyed after Chain Link 2, it can miss timing. On face value, this is no staple, and yet there's something to be said about a card that can essentially loop itself. This is thanks to Gearfried the Iron Knight, which is a monster that destroys equips equipped to it. Series 2 had the Gilfer loop, so why not have another one in Series 3? Together, Elma and Gearfried doesn't do anything productive. The combo needs another piece, and that's where Royal Magical Library from Champion of Black Magic comes in. This monster gains a spell counter every time you activate a spell card, and then you use 3 counters to draw a card. Since Elma is a card that will always return to you and can be activated with no cost, you can draw it through your deck and essentially build Exodia if you're running it. Even if you're not running Exodia, you can obtain essential combo pieces as you see fit. You can use this with Fire Princess Morale Boost from the most recent set for a death-dealing burn combo too, or power up Magical Marionette for a monster with near infinite attack and monster removal capabilities. Unlike Guilford OTK, Elma was a loop that wasn't marred by ruling inconsistencies. Power of the Guardian introduced another loop in Chick OTK. If you combine the effects of the newly released Dark Scorpion Chick the Yellow, Machior the Destructor, and Call of the Haunted, another infinite loop is created. Use Machiora's instant trap activation effect to use Call to revive Chick. Then inflict battle damage with Chick to bounce Call back to hand. Chick will then be sent to grave due to Call's effect. Use Machiora's effect again, so forth, and keep inflicting damage with Chick to eventually win. Furthermore, the set buffed good stuff as well with the introduction of Deity Warrior Lady. While Deity Warrior existed since Series 1, this lady can decide to use her effect, which now allowed you to attack weaker monsters without the fear of banishing your card and to take care of problematic threats at your earliest convenience. Plus, with 1500 attack, you can safely attack overfloaters as well. Its 1600 defense also meant it was protected from Breaker and Tribe too. Just keep in mind that magical scientists can simply send an expendable fusion monster to take care of Lady. Because of the influx of the 1600 stat line, the new Reflect Bounder saw experimentation as a 1700 attacker with a magic cylinder like burn effect. This one set included multiple OTK elements, a deck-defining burn/control card, and other power cards too. Moving forward, Jamacon made an impact as the game's first true anti-meta deck, and Gearfried Elma OTK became a solid beatdown deck with an infinite loop. Although Yadalock still had tremendous beatdown power, and even Sign OTK's speed was bar none. While looking at Tomahan in this environment, it remains to be on the decline. Power of the Guardian was a powerful way to end the major releases of 2002 OCG Yu-Gi-Oh! Come the new year of 2003, Yu-Gi-Oh's 4th year, and the OCG would get a new limited list, last seen in May. It was about damn time too, considering the major influx of meta-defining cards Series 2 already introduced. Newly limited cards, Breaker, Sangan, Serpent, Tribe, Elma, Charity, and Mirage. Semi-limited, Creature Swap, Breaker, and Tribe made sense given that they are high-powered staples. The gap in monster slots allowed for Deity Warrior Lady to fit in more decks now. Elma was the main problematic card, so there was no need to hit Gearfried or Royal Magical Library, considering at least with Elma, there was no way to search it. This made running any of the Elma OTK decks inconsistent. Serpent getting limited prevented major abuse from cards like Charity and Mirage, which were powerful in their own right. A bit shocking that it took this long to limit Charity and Sangan. Swap was put to 2 simply because of the earlier Tomahan deck. So moving forward, Gearfried OTK took a severe hit, whereas Yadalock still had enough general pieces to work. Swap at 2 did affect Tomahan, yes, however it ultimately didn't harm the game plan much at all. On the other hand, Jamacon and Stein OTK received no hits whatsoever. In Jamacon's case, the limit on Breaker hurt other duelists' ability to break the lock.
召喚せよ闇の一族解放せよ新たなる脅威 オフィシャルカードゲームデュエルモンスターズ闇魔界の脅威好評発売中そしてデュエリストレガシーボリューム4
February 20th would see the year's first core set, Threat of the Dark Demon World. This set introduced Archfiends as an archetype and included a reprint of Archfiend of Guilford, an ultimate rarity. The set introduced Dark Scorpion Mene the Thorn, a weak monster with 1000 attack with a specific searching and salvaging effect. Its 1800 defense gives it a big booty, especially in this era where 1900 beaters have become less favorable over more effect-driven monsters. Keep Mene in mind for later. Another powerful card was Tsukuyomi, a spirit monster that when normal summoned, it would flip a monster face down. This is a Book of Moon on repeat if used correctly. Stop floodgate monsters like Spell Canceller, reuse flip effect monsters like Magician of Faith, or even flip a monster down that has a low defense so you may attack over it. Now, defense stats mattered more for that Blade Knight isn't looking so tough with a measly 1000 defense. If used with Thousand Eyes Restrict, you can reuse Restrict's effect later or keep him face down so you can bypass Restrict's attack lock. Regardless of the stat line, beatdown decks by February were still the popular pick, making Tsukuyomi a rather underrated card upon release. Speaking of flip monsters, from the Demonic Gate comes Iron Blacksmith Kotetsu, a flip monster that can search an equip spell from deck to hand. Now, Premature Burial, Snatch Seal, or yes, Butterfly Dagger Elma was only one flip away. Gearfried OTK welcomed this, seeing as Elma was just recently limited. Essentially, you now had 4 copies of Elma in deck, so way to go, Konami. Thankfully, flip monsters are slow, and while you can now search Elma out, you still only had 1 copy, so if it got destroyed, you had to recur it with Faith, which is another slow flip monster. Threat of Dark Demon World wasn't a great set upon release, and even still, it created monsters that would be important to the future of the metagame. Moving past March and into April, there's a new limited list with newly limited Vampire Lord and Reflect Bounder. Lord was most likely a hit for its easy access by means of Pyramid Turtle, whereas Bounder got a hit for its Burned Brethren, Magic Cylinder, and Ceasefire. Konami simply didn't want there to be too many burn cards around this time. The rest of the list were cards getting loosened up. Makiora was the only card who was sent to semi-limited. This is most likely due to FTK decks not being viable at this point. The rest were all unlimited. Guardian Sphinx, Slate Warrior, Limited Removal, Ryoryoku, and Backup Soldier. Slate got off the list because pure fistfights weren't the standard anymore. Backup is a similar case where Exodia decks were no longer seen. The last 3 really shouldn't have been on the list in the first place, so it was only a matter of time.
開闢の使者は光と共に終焉の使者は闇と共に光と闇が出会う時やがて世界は混沌に包まれる遊戯王オフィシャルカードゲームデュエルモンスターズ混沌を制す者そしてデュエリストレガシーボリューム54月24日同時発売びっくりコナミ
A list may be controlled chaos, however, the true wielder of it would be revealed on April 24th with the next core set, Controller of Chaos. This is the first half of what we would know as Invasion of Chaos, so yeah, you know what that means. COC can be referred to as the first game-changing Yu-Gi-Oh set, for it didn't expand Exodia, nor did it introduce some new powerful combo. This was a tilt in a whole new dimension. This different dimension involves banishing light and dark monsters to summon even more powerful forces, Chaos monsters. One of the big Chaos monsters is Blackluster Soldier, Envoy of the Beginning. To summon him, you must banish 1 light and 1 dark monster from your grave. On the field, BLS can either banish 1 monster on field in which BLS can't attack that turn, plus it has the effect that if it destroys a monster by battle, it can attack once more. With 3000 attack and 2 great effects, you can clean through boards easily with a monster that isn't asking for too much to summon. The only monsters with near power to BLS may be Lava Golem seen in Jamacon decks, with the other option being Vampire Lord. With its banishing effect alone, you can take care of pesky monsters like Searchers, Floaters, Jars, and the like. The other key Chaos monster is Chaos Emperor Dragon, Envoy of the End. This dragon represents true chaos because by paying 1000 life points, it sends all cards on both players' fields and hands to the grave. Then you inflict 300 points of damage to your opponent for each card sent by this effect. Yeah, that's chaotic. It has the same summoning requirements as BLS with an equal 3k attack. The reset effect is one of Yu-Gi-Oh's best effects of all time, for it clears everything and potentially hefty burn damage. Think of it like Fiber Jar on crack. A powerful combo with CED is to use its effect and a way to bring out Yatagrassi for an easier Yata lock, assuming your opponent isn't holding a Sinister Serpent. There's also Chaos Sorcerer, another Chaos monster with less attack points than its Envoy brothers, and with a basic, by comparison, face-up monster banishing effect. Sorc didn't see much play at first considering how the limited list works. Both BLS and CED were at 3, so running any additional Chaos monsters is too expensive for a cost-driven engine. This is not to say Sorc is bad by any means, rather it's a case of inflation. One thing was clear, however: beatdown decks were out, Chaos decks were in, and non-Chaos attribute monsters have lost face. When it comes to the non-Chaos monsters, there are cards to pick from. One, for example, is Berserk Gorilla. This angry ape may not be the first 2k attacker, however, aside from needing it to be in attack mode and attack every turn if able, there's no major downside like life point cost of Dark Elf. The advantage of such a high low-level attacker cannot be ignored. This is the next evolution in beaters, as its attack is stagnant unlike, say, Blade Knight. Really, the only downside is that it's an Earth attribute, meaning it does not pair well with Chaos, so Blade Knight still saw play. The Chaos monsters in of themselves are beaters at minimum, so Gorilla was there more or less for convenience sake. Even still, you did have the no Chaos deck around, which is essentially good stuff beatdown sans Chaos. This deck is just inefficient when compared to Chaos, but it's interesting to look at. Chaos Necromancer is another new monster that introduces the non-standard attack potency. Depending on the amount of monsters in your grave, CN gets a 300 attack buff. With the Chaos monsters in general, graveyard management is now an important facet of the game. His relative in Grenmaju de Aiza was introduced here too, with an attack buff depending on your number of banish cards. Due to not many options to fill up the banish zone, Grenmaju doesn't have the proper resources for a dedicated deck at this point. With the invasion of Chaos, Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer emerged as a strong meta call. From 2001's Labyrinth of Nightmare set, Kaiku simply being on field prevents your opponent from banishing graveyard cards. In other words, this shuts off opposing Chaos plays and banish materials should the card inflict battle damage. And with 1800 attack, this is a stable monster that allows you to Chaos Summon in addition to Kaiku being a dark attribute. Needless to say, this was the end of generic beatdown decks. Even Stein OTK saw some erosion due to it needing more combo pieces than Chaos good stuff. All of this is a shame because Controller of Chaos gave us more than just beatdown tech. Soul Absorption, Blasting the Ruins, and Stumbling all have combo potential. Unfortunately, many of these cards just weren't interesting to test out at the time, whether because of Chaos or the combos needing more pieces to be more fleshed out. Boganin is another new card with some notes of interest. During each of your standby phases, this weak monster inflicts 600 points. A subpar monster by its own merits, yet it allows to be used for all it requires is to keep on field and can be backed up by control cards. This is where Jamacon decks come in. Now you have a strategy that could potentially put your opponent on a clock if locked down in the right circumstances. Reload is a new card that allows you to reset your hand -1, but it allows you a second chance to access your combo pieces. While Jamacon decks still hung on to relevancy, it was a matter of fact that whoever controlled Chaos gained advantage. While in May we would see some new releases like Structure Deck Yugi Volume 2 with Magical Dimension, we would also see a notable release in Limited Edition 5. These were distributed by Shonen Jump as a Yugi and Kaiba pack that contained some new cards, Soul Taker, Magician's Valkyria, and Magic Formula just as an example. But the pack introduced an even more terrifying card than Cloning or even Silent Doom. That card would be none other than Victory Dragon. This golden dragon must be normal summoned by tributing 3 dragon monsters. If you decide the game with a direct attack, then you win the match. With a heavy summoning condition and only 2400 attack, of which is for a specifically timed direct attack, the weight of gold is too much for a deck to bear. The weird thing is that Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't have any strict rules when it comes to match surrender. While some places like the USA is fine with a duelist surrendering for acknowledging that the match has been lost, in other countries like Japan, a duelist has the right to deny an opponent's surrender. This is why Victory Dragon was designed the way it was, because this denial existed in the first place. When it comes to card design, this is absolutely bonkers and would cause havoc in the future. Come July 1st, 2003, and an overdue limited list would hit the competitive scene, although the only change would be Chaos Emperor Dragon going from unlimited to limited. Despite Victory Dragon being theoretically absurd, it was not a problem at the moment. Many saw Emperor as the, well, Emperor of Chaos, and thus it needed to get hit for the game's health. Now you may be wondering about BLS, and his list miss came strictly down to Konami not wanting to stifle sales of the recent set. Technically speaking, the Chaos deck did lose power and allowed games to slow down a bit without the walking reset button at 3. With the 2-card gap, Chaos Sorcerer saw some play, even if others suggested that it's a bad card simply by comparison to its older brothers. Regardless of the hit, Chaos decks were still by far the most powerful deck at this time, with no light at the end of the tunnel.
今、大いなる魔術師が目を覚ます。滅亡を呼ぶ邪悪な侵略者と対峙せよ。遊戯王オフィシャルカードゲームデュエルモンスターズ暗黒の侵略者好評発売中。そしてストラクチャーデッキ城之内編ボリューム2。びっくり。コナミ。
Continuing down our descent, on July 17th, 2003 would be the release of Invader of Darkness, the second wave of the Invasion of Chaos. This is another set of useful tools: compulsory evacuation device, smashing ground, Janjo the 10,000 hands, and salvage, just to name a few. At the end of the day, the single biggest card of the set has to be Dark Magician of Chaos. When Demok is summoned properly, you can salvage a spell card. You can even revive it with Monster Reborn to bring Reborn back to your hand. Plus, any monster destroyed by battle with this card is banished instead. This meant that it was a natural enemy of Searchers and Recruiters, which in addition to Kaiku, was both a killing blow to the Tomahan deck and was a way to counter Chaos from filling the grave. And as a sort of safeguard, when Demok leaves the field, it too is banished instead. I wouldn't call this a downside, considering Invader of Darkness also introduced another piece of the combo, Dimension Fusion. The effect is pay 2,000 life points, both players special summon as many other monsters as possible that have been removed from play. While the cost is high and your opponent can benefit off of it too, this card allows for some explosive plays. In relation to Demok, you now have a great way to bring back the card post-banishment and thus spell salvage once again. Even Chaos decks enjoy this card, for you could use it as a way to return monsters to the grave for Chaos summoning. As a quick mention, the set introduced Dedication Through Light and Darkness, which could get Demok out by attributing a Dark Magician. Yeah, that doesn't sound worth it. Regardless, the Dark Magician of the Chaos variety is an extremely powerful card for combo decks moving forward. One of these combo decks would be an FTK deck, combining the efforts of Magical Scientist and Catapult Turtle. While technically the combo has existed for some time now, all of the essential parts for a playable deck now existed. The idea is simple: use Scientists to get out fusion monsters for Turtle to launch into your opponents until victory. Neither effect were once per turn, and thanks to a plethora of powerful fusion monsters like Crimson Sunbird, Aqua Dragon, and 2200 beaters, the well of power was aplenty. The only thing you as a pilot needed to do was to have enough life points for the combo and a way to get your key pieces on field. Demok helps by allowing you to use powerful spells that were once stuck in grave. It may not be as meta warping as Chaos, yet its FTK presence is still felt. Despite Chaos domination, one cannot ignore other Invaders of Darkness, one of which is Manticore of Darkness, a monster that can revive itself by sending a specific monster to the grave. Because its effect is not once per turn, yet common theme, nor is it too specific on cost, you can infinitely loop Manticore by using another copy as cost. This is the Manticore loop and works phenomenally with a certain card called Card of Safe Return that lets you draw a card every time a monster is summoned from your grave. Yes, a new FTK deck called Treasure Card Manticore is born and is the evolution of the Treasure Card Exodia deck. What's more is that should a piece of Exodia wind up in grave, you can use this combo instead. Send Machiora to grave, establish infinite draw, accumulate 15 or more cards in grave, activate exchange of the spirit while having Raigeki break and Manticore in hand, use break and discard Manticore to establish loop once again. This is not even counting exchange as a finishing blow card either. It's not the most consistent FTK deck, for you need to draw into safe return to make any progress. At least just having a 2300 beater in Manticore was still considered decent to survive a turn. The deck does lack the more applicable tools Scientist FTK has, even if useful cards like Sacred Crane was key for Manticore FTK since it has a draw effect and a Wing Beast typing. As to summarize the environment in July 2003, Chaos decks were dominant, and the addition of Dark Magician of Chaos and Dimension Fusion only helped that argument. Manticore FTK now exists, but was a bit inconsistent, let alone its FTK brother in Scientist FTK being better in only its infant state. Neither FTK decks could deter the conquest of Chaos. That much was for sure. Moving on to August 7th, and the second volume in the Joey Structure deck would come out with some expected reprints: Guilford the Lightning, Sinister Serpent, and Alligator's Sword. More importantly is one new card, and that is Foolish Burial. Yeah, it came out this early in the game compared to the TCG's late 2007 release. With this card, you can send one monster from deck to grave. It's simple, but most of Yu-Gi-Oh's best cards are simple effects, aren't they? This can be marked as the period when Konami decided that the graveyard was just as important as the main deck. Despite many years later with Foolish seen as a staple card, upon its OCG debut it wasn't seen as a key card. This is because unless you're about to drop a Chaos monster, the card essentially does nothing. At the very least, you could use it with Sinister Serpent or put a monster that can be revived. When it comes to Chaos decks, it needed more than what a single card like Foolish could provide at the time. It's a case of, I guess you guys aren't ready for that yet, but your kids are gonna love it. This is not to say nobody played it, because people did. One monster you can send is Manticore of Darkness, which immediately sets one piece of the combo up. Essentially, you're now running 6 Manticores, although you still need one in hand, so it doesn't blow the combo out of the water. All of this is meaningless if you can't draw into Safe Return anyways, but hey, it does power up an already notable deck. In addition, Foolish assisted the reemergence of the deck destruction deck in the form of an FTK deck. Beforehand, it was tough to get your one copy of Cyberjar, but now with the new spell, you have a roundabout way to get the flip monster. The Shallow Grave, after all, was made for a strategy like this. Despite all this synergy, it's still seen as an even weaker deck compared to its FTK kin. Still, deck destruction's presence made it so that a counter like Nico Mounted King could still exist in the side deck even at one copy should you fear the deck. Another card you should fear comes in the next release, the valuable Book 6 on September 19th. All 3 cards from the set had the same 6 theme: Maximum 6, Dangerous Machine Type 6, and the big card, 6 Cents. They all also had a dice theme, and I mean that when I say that 6 Cents is a big card. You declare 2 numbers and your opponent rolls 1 die. If the declared number is drawn, then you draw equal to that number. If it's a loss, then you mill them out instead. Of course, you're going to pick 5 and 6, and you literally have a 1/3 chance of getting the roll right. I don't need to tell you that using a trap with a high probability to draw up to 6 cards is a bit powerful. In short, the card says you have a 1/3% chance at best to win at sacrifice. There's still the risk of getting the outcome wrong. At the same time, it can water the grave for light and dark monsters for chaos plays, so even the downside is mitigated. But hey, if you miss it once, you can still run up to 3 copies per deck. The card is unbalanced in many ways and created a dice game during its heyday. Even more so since if you're playing Machiora, then you can activate Sense turn 1 potentially. Machiora plus Graceful became a popular combo in deck destruction FTK. Other FTK decks like Manticore didn't use it as much due to the risk of losing Exodia pieces right away. All things considered, the risk made Exchange of the Spirit more popular. Remember, that's a card that was the card at the end of Series 2 OCG. But yeah, 6 Cents didn't technically shake up the meta since the main deck that used it, Chaos, was already the top deck. It wouldn't be too long before the next list as October came and more cards were limited. BLS, Demok, and Scientist, with Manticore and Morphing Jar getting semi-limited, Jar getting loosened up from limited. There is a definite awareness of the Chaos dominance from Konami by this point. After all, it's one thing to want people to buy your product, but it's another to deter players from a crumbling ecosystem. From the July list, it was easy to tell that limiting only one Chaos monster wouldn't be effective for long. And with the new addition of Demok and Scientist FTK picking up steam, they had to be checked as well. Scientist was also a problem in Chaos for summoning light and dark fusion monsters, so it most certainly had to get hit. All this said, it essentially killed Scientist FTK for the time being. Manticore as an FTK deck needed some regulation too. Even so, you could access the FTK, having one less Manticore in your deck affected the success rate since you needed to draw into at least one of them. Deck Destruction FTK, on the other hand, did get a boost with Jar going from 1 to 2. With the deck adopting Exchange and Sense, there was a definite tailwind for the strategy despite it being inherently weaker to the other meta decks. Because of the list, the No Chaos Beatdown decks did receive some leeway alongside Tomahan, Jamakan, and Stein FTK. This is not to say Chaos took a big hit, far from it, as the Void and Envoys were filled by Chaos Sorcerer, a sort of BLS light. It may not be at its peak yet, however, it filled the Void quite nicely for being simply a Chaos summonable monster with a banishing effect. At least the power gap between decks isn't as colossal as it was before. The top deck was still evident, but for the first time, cracks were present.
魔界の力を得るか、それとも聖域の力を得るか。決断の時は今。遊戯王オフィシャルカードゲームデュエルモンスターズ天空の聖域好評発売中。そしてストラクチャーデッキ海馬編ボリューム2。びっくり。コナミ。
November 20th, 2003 would mark the release of the next set, Sanctuary in the Sky. This set would focus on light and angel cards like Agent of Creation Venus, Zaborg the Thunder Monarch, and Wall of Revealing Light. On the other hand, Monster Gate was certainly viewed upon with great potential early on. You contribute a monster to mill through your deck until you find a normal summonable monster and special summon it. This would be a great way to get out a strong monster depending on your luck. Your luck can be manipulated by adjusting your deck to increase the probability of milling into a big monster. A card like this is not unlike another card called Reasoning, and as such, the deck type would be known as Reasoning Gate. The first deck to adopt this strategy was Scientist FTK. Yeah, we're back, baby. Considering the deck needs both Scientist and Turtle on field for the FTK, and the deck runs a lower monster count, the Reasoning Gate cards improve consistency quite substantially. Fiend Sanctuary was another card added in thanks to its synergy with Monster Gate. The card generates a token that can be tributed, so not only does it not interfere with RG, it assists too. Thanks to all of this FTK deck overshadowed Manticore and Deck Destruction FTK and pushed back the more roguish decks. Chaos still remained on top, but the impact of RG certainly shook it. Part of it even came down to the opening RPS. You would definitely see more use of Imperial Order and Master of Restrict in the side deck. In the last month of the year, December 11th would see the second Kaiba structure deck with a number of reprints and new cards like Shrink. This is a quick play that cuts a monster's attack in half. It's a simple card that gets the most advantage in weaker monster-style decks like Tomahan. Cards like Don's Lug and Dark Scorpion Monet use that cut attack to help trigger their effects regardless if the duelist playing the decks were ironically small. Let's not kid ourselves, this was a dark year for the game. We started with a variety of Elma FTKs, with other top decks being Tomahan, Yadalok, Jamakan, and Stein FTK. While Vampire Lord would get limited, Machiora would get relaxed as semi-limited. Then in April, Chaos would hit the scene and completely overwhelm the meta. No Chaos beatdown decks would exist with little success. Victory Dragon would be released too, which was a whole deal in regards to interpersonal aspects. Slowly, Chaos monsters would get limited both before and after the release of DMOC and D-Fusion. With those cards plus Monster Gate, Scientist FTK would become a fearsome deck in the eyes of Chaos, not forgetting about the emergence of Manticore FTK. The 2003 World Championship would see Tomahan, aka Hand Control, win first place due to the West card pool being behind. Remember that the OCG had plenty of unique power cards like Sixth Sense that once again warped the scene. Seemingly nothing could stop the collapsing metagame that was 2003 OCG Yu-Gi-Oh! Despite Konami's best efforts. Needless to say, something needed to change, or else all hope is lost. Yu-Gi-Oh's 5th year starts with cloudy skies. We wouldn't see a list for quite some time, so the meta will have to wait for any substantial changes. This does not mean we wouldn't see any important cards, as the first would be the Duel Monsters Expert 3 promo cards, with DD Assailant being the key card here. This has a similar effect to Warrior Lady, just with a higher attack, and it has to be destroyed by battle. The extra attack does go a long way in an era of 1600 attackers, and beatdown decks would consider this a power card. Its effect makes it more passive than its sister and does punish chaos monsters that attack into it. And due to its earth attribute, chaos decks rather not run Assailant. Due to the high amount of DD monsters, this led to the birth of the Dimensional Slash deck. D-Slash is like beatdown, but less good stuff considering the high amount of DD monsters. The idea is not to fill your grave, rather preventing chaos from accessing their boss monsters. With Assailant, the gap between chaos and other decks narrowed, which for this period is a welcome change. Unfortunately, one issue would be that Scientist FTK would be separate from all this DD shenanigans. Another issue being, even if a more playable, albeit derivative deck is now around, 6th Sense made the meta anything but healthy.
あるかなる古に刻まれし王の魂よ、その姿を我が眼前に表したまえ。遊戯王オフィシャルカードゲームデュエルモンスターズファラオの遺産好評発売中。そしてストラクチャーデッキバリク編びっくりコナミ。
We wouldn't have to wait long for the next and final core set of Series 3, Pharaoh's Inheritance, on February 26. We'd see some useful cards like Level Limit Area B and King of the Swamp. While good stuff wouldn't make use of any of these, the new Night Assailant is certainly a card to highlight. This flip monster destroys an opposing monster as well as salvaging a flip effect if Assailant is sent from hand to grave. This is like Man-Eater Bug, just without the worry of a self-destruction effect and an easy-to-use secondary effect. You can trigger it with popular cards like Raigeki Break and Tribe Infecting Virus. In some ways, it was better than Sinister, and multiple NAs alone would work fantastic alongside mass dumping cards like Graceful and Card Destruction. While flips weren't popular at this point, duelists still played power cards like Cyber and Fiber Jar. Knowing how cards tend to be abused in the OCG, this will lead to an FTK deck very soon. Not leaving the other notable card out, Protector of the Sanctuary would be a new card with the effect to block your opponent from drawing outside the draw phase. It's a solid effect to prevent Pot or Graceful from going through. The true strength from Protector comes from support and morph into a new deck called Sanctuary Full Hands. Combining Protector with card exchange cards like Morphing Jar and Card D was the name of the game. While technically you cannot use Card D with Protector due to effect wording, you can still chain Call of the Haunted to Card D to pull off the block. This was not the same with Jar, so the deck strategy was to get rid of your opponent's cards while replenishing your own by whatever means necessary. The deck has a number of issues due to it being such a specific combo deck. You need proper cards in hand, field setup, and in a timely manner where the combo is even worth it. Scientist FTK already exists, which by all means is a better combo deck. With the final set out, the issue still remained. The metagame was anything but balanced, and for the bulk of Series 3, this has been the darkest Yu-Gi-Oh! Has ever been. Card expansion has not slowed down, and regulation has not caught up to speed. It was at this point Konami finally responded. On March 1st, 2004, a new list came out with, for the first time, cards banned from competitive play. The following cards are now restricted: Cyber and Fiber Jar, Injection Fairy Lily, Yada, Change of Heart, Duo, Feather Duster, Painful, Raigeki, and Imperial Order. While not necessarily good in regards to card sales, having a restricted list was an unavoidable measure and needed to control game balance. This is not to say it hit all the dangerous cards, as the envoys were still around. It would be unrealistic for every single impact card to get hit, and the aftermath would be a wait and see in regards to list updates. A list is sure to make other power cards less essential, free up space in deck building, and not simply make a power-only good stuff deck. This led to more beatdown decks as attackers were reliable on draw and were safer now that Raigeki and Cyberjar aren't around anymore. With a beater-heavy era approaching, one card stood in its way, and that card is Crush Card Virus. Using some of the cards we discussed throughout this video like Mine the Thorn and Shrink, monsters with over 1500 attack became devalued. Crush card could take care of strong monsters for 3 turns, and by this point it was reprinted plenty of times. It could be seen in good stuff prior to this deck's inception, yet it ultimately shined because of this dedicated deck and because of the list. Mine was a great companion card due to it being able to search virus targets out, and that ban list did hurt the powerful Chaos deck, and as a result, Mine Virus became a scary deck moving forward. The meek shall inherit the earth, I suppose. Yet, still intact is Scientist FTK, since the ban list didn't really affect the deck in any major capacity. This is also true for any Recruiter Good Stuff based deck, so Mine Virus didn't immediately sweep the meta. Regardless, making a ban list at all was a necessary step to make to ensure the future of Yu-Gi-Oh! There are still clear issues that Konami most definitely needed to address, but it's a step forward nonetheless. As duelists waited to see how the meta would ultimately shape up post-ban list, March 2004 gave them Premium Pack 6. While the cards would be available the previous December at Jump Festa, it wasn't until now it received a general release. Marshmallow would be a great defender along the likes of Spirit Reaper. Battle destruction resistance with a minor burn effect is not too shabby. It also doesn't have a self-destruction by targeting effect either, making it a reliable wall. Plus it's also light, whereas Spirit is dark. Shield Crush is like an upgraded Nobleman of Crossout in some ways. It destroys a defense position monster regardless if it's face up or down, yet it's downgraded in regards to Nox banishing effect if strictly looking at set monsters. Crush also can't take care of attack mode monsters like Fissure or Smashing Ground can. All in all, it's a card that, while not great with other cards like Knock and Dark Hole still legal, has its removal uses, especially at the time when Reaper and the new Marshmallow were around. Legacy of Yatagarasu would also be released here as the same function Jar of Greed has. You also get to draw 2 cards should your opponent control a spirit monster, so technically this is an upgrade. Too bad the only spirit monster seen, Yatagarasu, was freshly banned. Pretty much this was just seen as extra jars and happy to be played along Machiora. In due time, however, you'd see this card really pop off. While Marshmallow was a powerful new addition to the card pool, it wouldn't be OCG Yu-Gi-Oh! If it didn't drop a true bomb at the end. March 25th would be the release of Structure Deck Merrick, which included 2 new cards, one of which would be Malevolent Catastrophe, which is a conditional heavy storm. Having this card around made duelists wonder if they should set back row in main phase 2. The real impact of this deck stems from one specific new card. Series 2 at the end had Exchange of the Spirit, while Series 3 has Magical Stone Excavation. Activate this to discard 2 cards and salvage 1 spell. From the outset, it may look disadvantageous in card economy. It's easier to use than spell reproduction, but the card loss is all the same. Unlike similar cards like Demock or Faith, MSE doesn't require any setup, and thus prime for combo decks. The main deck to use this would be Scientist FTK, since the downside was small compared to the potential first turn win. This would also be a way to send Machiora to grave or even Night Assailant for the Assailant FTK deck, which was now in full function. The idea behind this deck is to summon Royal Magical Library and use MSE to discard 2 Assailants to return a MSE already in grave. Both Assailants will return the other, and thus an infinite loop is established. This essentially became the new Elma FTK. While its first incarnation is not an FTK over a controlled deck, the insurmountable card advantage was close enough to consider it an indirect FTK. What's better is that it's rather resistant to Mine Virus given the high amount of weak monsters in the main deck. Deck Destruction FTK would also enjoy this new spell even after Cyberjar got banned. Morphing Jar alone would be enough to load the grave with cards for exchange, and MSE would boost the consistency of getting cards you needed to complete the FTK. But as it is, Scientist FTK would be the best FTK deck moving forward. While MSE doesn't belong in every deck, it did become the soul for combo decks. April would come and go with nothing too notable, and May would bring the start to Series 4. Yeah, that kind of ended with an anticlimactic ending. New FTK decks were emerging and pre-existing FTK decks were gaining power, and otherwise the virus hell was spreading across the dueling landscape. Moving forward, the main decks would be Chaos, Beatdown, Dimensional Slash, Scientist FTK, Deck Destruction FTK, and Assailant FTK. I considered ending it at the ban list, however there wasn't much left for Series 3, and I wouldn't want you all wondering what the last 2 to 3 months were like. This is not a satisfying end to the OCG's third series of Yu-Gi-Oh! Truth be told, this wasn't a satisfying 2 years of Yu-Gi-Oh! At all when you consider all the FTK decks, infinite loops, and overpowering chaos monsters. The game also saw a plethora of new cards the TCG wouldn't see for quite some time. Magical Stone Excavation, Foolish Burial, Sixth Sense, etc. We at least got a new card layout which allowed for more complex card design, combo potential, and a nice uniform design for Yu-Gi-Oh! Moving forward, especially for the TCG. Konami did understand where the game was going and it wasn't good. So measures were made to steer the game in safer waters once again, and if things keep going up and down as they have been, who's to say the dark days are remotely close to over? I guess we'll have to find out in a Series 4 video. But this video has been long enough and I want to sleep. My voice is almost dead. I will see you all later. Daddy Janjo out.